Oh, hello, welcome to the lecture on value that I'm going to record now. Feeling a bit better. And yeah, it's very on point, a reminder that value is very much embodied also, and that there is no higher value or very few other things that are as valuable as one's health. So, let me start with just a general provocation also that it generally, when you look at the different kinds of disciplines, anthropology, philosophy, economics, the general idea is that value is really about price, it's about beliefs, it's about moral judgments, and all of that is, of course, true, but the real core of understanding value properly is that value is what makes life work better. What makes life better is actually what value actually is. And you can find this even in the definitions of value or the origins of the word value itself in the etymology. There is it comes from the Latin word valere, which means to be healthy, to be strong, to be capable, but it also has all of these other layers of meaning, such as to mean and to also in terms of the value of a word, for example. So verbum valet would mean the word means something. So you have this beautiful range of meanings that's already in the Latin root of the English word value, that it has something to do with health. It has something to do with like real embodiment and what you're capable of doing in the world. And value really is what makes this life in the world better, right? So that's the core assumption that I'm putting into this whole value theory. And from there, also, you can find all of the major implications and conclusions that are coming from them. So when you're healthy, you do not think about your health. This is a very important thing, and you can all test this yourself. Like while you're healthy, you don't think about health or illness. You're just doing the things that you're doing in the world. Or when you're with friends and everything's going great, you don't think about friendship, and you don't reevaluate your friendships. There's no reason for this. So when daily life flows, nothing calls attention to itself, and that actually is the highest value. Value then has this paradoxical ontology that it is at its highest when it's actually completely invisible, when it's completely illegible, also when it just doesn't really stick out in any kind of way. So you can call this the silence of value, but it's part of this being in the world of all the most valuable things that determine them, that there's this friction there, that what's really valuable doesn't actually come to attention, and it also doesn't come into verbalization or into symbolization. It's just there. And one of the major problems with all of the existing value theories is that they've never really grappled with this, that they've never really fully come to terms with this, because they're all still coming from this assumption that surely value is what is symbolized, and often also even saying, if it's not symbolized, if it's not verbalized, if it's not made explicit, then it's not valuable at all. And this is particularly clear in the case of economics. So ever since the 19th century, the economists also the classic theory of value in economics that still holds today also is that there is no value inherent in any kind of commodity, in any kind of object. You need to actually articulate the value of a thing, and that happens at the moment of its transaction, of the exchange. And only then, in this symbolization of the price, then you know the value of a thing. So every estate agent will tell you this when you try to sell your house, or when to no, especially when you sell your house. The other way around, it's clear anyway. So any estate agent will tell you there is no one knows how much your flat is actually valuable until you find that one buyer who is willing to put up £100,000, or probably a lot more than that, at that particular time. So what is the value of the flat is entirely determined by that willingness to pay from a buyer in a market exchange, and only at the moment of the actual transaction is the value realized, and it is being realized only in its symbolization. So you can see also that what I'm proposing here is almost the exact inverse of this. What I'm proposing is that the real value of everything lies precisely in when it's not coming to symbolization, or also when it's not actually being part of a transaction, which is another major problem with especially the economic ideas about value, is that it's everything requires a transaction for value to actually become realized. And what I'm saying is that no, it's almost the exact opposite. True value really lies in everything that is not being made explicit, and the transactions that come to the fore, that seem to take up such a prominent position in all of these value theories, that is just a little moment, a little blip in time. Yes, of course, you need to also transact things. You need to buy certain things. You need to sell certain things. There are transactions of all sorts, but these transactions, they are very rare and in between, and most of your life is spent not transacting anything, not exchanging anything, and not also, that also means that most of the time no value as such ever comes to articulation until it really has to. So even this is standard stuff for economists. They think that we're transacting all the time and therefore realizing value all the time. But even anthropologists, economic anthropologists, usually think that transactions are really the core of all societies. And you've heard me even talk about this in those terms in the Social Anthropology 1A lectures, for example. This is something that I also actually believed until quite recently, that these transactions are the major place where value is just articulated and where it becomes real. And now I'm thinking it's the exact opposite. Value is most real when it does not come to any form of symbolic articulation at all. Okay, so what is the how can we get into this even more with specific examples? And another thing about value and value theory is that in many ways it has this weird friction between things that are just blindingly obvious, and again, you don't even seem to need to talk about anything on the one hand, and on the other hand, there it is full of these moments when these different forms of, like, what seems blindingly obvious just don't cohere into a one notion of value, or seemingly so. So when you have ideas about, like, is this coffee worth £5 or not? Well, what are the criteria for determining whether this is this exquisite kind of coffee bean, and the roasting and the interior of the cafe is so nice, like that all these factors come together to say, like, yes, it is actually worth £5? Or you'd say, like, no way, this is just tastes exactly the same as the espresso at Greg's, for example. Is friendship priceless or just expensive in time? Like, what are we doing with friends? Is it worth spending time with friends? Are there other benefits to being in a friendship with other people? Or why? This is something that economists have been writing about since Adam Smith. These seeming paradoxes. You have, like, water, which is important for life, and you have diamonds, which are beautiful, but no one's gonna eat any kind of diamonds, and no one's lives depend on diamonds. So, but the diamond is worth so much, and the water is free or next to free. How can we explain this? That something that's actually life-saving and life important is relatively cheap or doesn't cost anything, and the diamond is so expensive. Again, these are pseudo paradoxes, I think, that are just emerging because the entire field in economics and in philosophy and in anthropology doesn't really understand what value actually is, and what the relationship is between value and its various kinds of symbolizations. So my main argument also that I develop in the long lecture script is that value actually lives in the mesocosm. It's the mesocosm is this middle world between the macrocosm, where the everything is, like, so big that you can't really understand it, you can't grasp it, you can only symbolize it also, or visualize it through all sorts of symbolic forms, but you can't really grasp the size of the universe, or what a black hole actually is. And on the other hand, you've got the microcosm. That's quantum physics, that's chemistry, that's all this stuff that goes on without any doubt on a level that is too small for our perception to perceive. So the mesocosm is this Goldilocks zone in between the microcosm and the macrocosm, which is impossibly small also. Like, this is another realization that I think is just so underrated in all of these discussions, is that how incredibly unlikely it is that you have this one zone where coordination actually becomes possible, where the coffee actually smells like coffee and tastes like coffee, and I can grab the cup and I can drink it, and I can also of course pay for this coffee also, and even transact it, or that there is this zone where something like coffee is even possible, because we're not interacting with the coffee on a atomic level. Like, no one thinks, oh, I am a heap of atoms, and now I am adding another heap of atoms to this heap of atoms. Like, that's no way of thinking about coffee. Of course, you can think about it in this way, but even if you think about coffee in this way, you're not actually gonna change the experience of drinking coffee. You cannot change the experience of drinking coffee in such a symbolic way, right? Because notice what I've done when I say this: I am a heap of atoms and the coffee is a heap of atoms. I've just re-symbolized something that is outside the grasp of the mesocosm, this field of actual coordination. And of course, that's what science does all the time as well. But still, there's nothing actually that helps you to actually leave the mesocosm. You cannot leave the mesocosm. You would still, even if you symbolize the coffee as it's a heap of atoms, which costs £5, is something that you can't coordinate with in any meaningful way. You're only coordinating with the coffee, with the barista, with the cafe, with the friend that you're going to the cafe in a meaningful way within the mesocosm, right? That's what I mean by the mesocosm. And there's absolutely nothing abstract about the mesocosm. There's nothing fancy or difficult about it. The mesocosm is simply the world that you and I are actually living in. And that's what's so important about it also, that there's no mystery about the mesocosm. There's no fancy, difficult to understand behind of it. That's the whole point. There is no behind the mesocosm. It's the field of coordination that all living beings actually find themselves in, and they are coordinating in this particular Goldilocks zone. And of course, there is some kind of microcosm, and then there is a macrocosm as well. But in those zones, you cannot coordinate. This is beyond what life can actually do. So that's what I'm talking about. First of all, value actually lives in the mesocosm. And what I'm also distinguishing, this is a larger project called Living Value Theory, which is an extension of the embodied value theory that I've developed in my book from 2022, Living Worth. So there I was talking about embodied value theory, and now living value theory is an extension of this, or a massive change of direction also, actually, in many ways. And the key insight of living value theory is that the mesocosm is this zone of recursive mediation. So recursivity is when you are responding to something and that thing responds to you as well, or that person responds to you as well. So, human beings are, of course, extremely recursive with each other, because, like, the sheer fact that I am recording this lecture for you only makes sense because I think that I can talk, and I think that you can understand what I am talking about, at least the basics of it, and then you can respond in a meaningful way to that as well. And then you can also let me know what you thought of the lecture and of the ideas that we're talking about. That's recursivity. No mystery here as well. But again, there's utter confusion about this in philosophy and in anthropology and in so many fields about this. And the term itself, recursivity, has never really been even used in this particular way, which is actually stunning in itself. So that's recursivity, and mediation is what I call how the mesocosm actually unfolds in 5 distinct, they're not layers, there's ways of, there are mediations. There's also, I thought about this for a long time, there's no real better word for it. I call this mediation. What needs to be taken into account, and actually always is taken into account, when you do any kind of valuation and when you go through the world. This being in the world requires you to be mindful, or not mindful, to implicitly at least take into account all of these 5 mediations. So the first mediation is embodiment. So you take into account the coffee again. The value of the coffee is partially mediated by the fact that it's morning and not night, that you are thirsty, that you like coffee, that coffee makes you feel good, that you're not drinking the coffee too close to bedtime because then you might not be able to sleep, and so on and so forth. So the value of the coffee is mediated through embodiment, right? And the value also of this cup of coffee of £5 depends entirely also on, first of all, do you even like coffee or not? Because if you don't like coffee, then don't get the coffee. And if you actively hate coffee, then even a £2 beautifully created barista coffee is not gonna be valuable for you because you just hate coffee. So that's embodiment. Being with is the next mediation. Again, incredibly important. People say also, like, why do you go to a cafe in the first place? It's actually the being with of being there with friends, with meeting other people, just being surrounded by other people is part of the value of being in a cafe. And the whole experience also is something that has a certain kind of value to it, and then that's also being priced into it. So that of a coffee that you can make maybe even on the same level of quality, if not actually higher quality, that you're buying in a cafe, you just can't really recreate the being with dimension of the coffee if you are making the coffee at home. So that also makes a big difference being with. The third mediation is dwelling. Dwelling is everything that's super important but not created by human beings. And usually it's also non-recursive. So dwelling is everything that has to do with landscapes, with geographies, altitudes, climate, weather, lunar cycles, solar cycles, that the fact that the sun rises in the morning and sets in the evening is incredibly valuable, but there's nothing you can do about it, and also that no one else has ever been able to do anything about it. That's just what it is. Dwelling is unbelievably valuable, and you also constantly co-mediate value through dwelling without ever actually having created this in any kind of way, or fabricated this, or no one ever turned this into a commodity as well. This is just what the world is. It determines what is valuable and what is not valuable in ways that are beyond the influence of both human creation, but also of symbolization, right? So that's another thing. There are like very strict limits on just what symbolization can actually do to dwelling in all of these different forms. Also, just think of time, for example. Like you can symbolize time as, oh, I actually think that I'm gonna live forever, or I want to return to 1983 or something like that. No, it's not going to happen. There's very, very strict limits on what symbolization can actually do in this. So that's dwelling. And with dwelling also, you see when I talk about solar cycles, for example, or time of day, where mediations also kind of shade into each other. Like take the fact that the coffee is probably much less valuable at 7 p.m. in the morning for me and some other people who are sensitive to caffeine in terms of sleep, because, well, it's just I value my sleep as well. It's that time of day. Like this is also just a large rhythms of the cosmos also, that there is nighttime and daytime. I have to be mindful of sleep rhythms just as much as what the coffee actually tastes like. Again, you see this is very important for any kind of valuation of this cup of coffee. The fourth mediation is multimateriality. So that's the domain of non-recursive entities that are still incredibly important for my recursivity, my recursion with the world. And yet it's not been, I mean, this has actually been created in this way. This is a human creation in one way or another. And it can be even, this even starts with if it's raw materials that are being extracted. Already the act of extraction sort of turns something that would belong to dwelling into something that would belong to the world of multimateriality. And that also you can see multimateriality in the case of the cup of coffee on every plane. Like, of course, you first need to have the beans and all the barista equipment, or just a coffee maker of sorts. And somebody must have roasted the coffee and picked it, shipped it. Like, just think of so many people that have been involved in the production and the making, distribution, preparation of coffee. It is actually always quite mind-boggling, of course, to realize the sheer extent of these networks that are necessary to just produce this multi-material entity called coffee in that regard. But also notice here that there are some very important dimensions that come into the multi-materiality of the coffee that are beyond or that cannot be fully reduced to where the other mediations are still playing a role. For example, with coffee, it just happens to be quite important where it comes from. And that has to do with the dwelling conditions of the country of origin and what kind of climate there is, altitudes, sunlight, soil, all of that matters greatly also. So for coffee, the way that also the just price of coffee is actually determined comes from all of these factors that are important in terms of dwelling even before the coffee as multi-material entity even emerges. So for example, like Kenyan coffee might be more expensive, or like what have I seen the other day, like Hawaiian blue something coffee. So there you have like this coffee from Hawaii was like 10 times more expensive than the coffee that I would otherwise buy. And why is it so expensive? Well, the number one feature of it is nothing that's been human made in this regard. It's the dwelling aspect of the coffee. It is that Hawaii, for various kinds of reasons, affords certain kinds of soil and climate conditions and God knows what else that then allows this coffee to develop a flavor that is beyond anything that you would ever have from just a normal, large plantation somewhere in, God knows, in Kenya, let's say. Okay. And then the final one of these mediations is symbolization. And that's the one where anthropologists have been obsessing about, and often actually they've tried to reduce almost the value to the multi-symbolization mediation. So as if the value of the coffee is entirely made up in your mind through the values that we have, through the ideas that we have about, it's just that we think that Hawaiian coffee tastes so much better. But that's a purely constructed idea. It doesn't actually, it's not really true. Everything's just symbolically constructed somehow. And I mean, my theory about all this is like absolutely not. This is one of the fundamental mistakes also of anthropology, to think that symbolization would ever have this level of power to change the world in the way that we're living in it. It is simply not true. You cannot just also symbolize your way into Hawaiian coffee. It just doesn't really work. Like, you can, if there's some really nasty, cheap instant coffee that costs you like, the equivalent of 3p or even less than that, yeah, try actually symbolizing your way into believing that this is as nice to taste as this Hawaiian coffee. Uh, I don't believe it's gonna work. But even more importantly, what are we talking about here? We're talking about coffee, and coffee is actually a drink that we just metabolize also. And metabolism is so unbelievably important, and yet so unbelievably overlooked in anthropological theories, in philosophical theories, and in economic theories as well. Right? Think of this is also in the long lecture script, and it's a very famous example in this, where you have this idea of value as marginally decreasing also the more you have of it. So the classic economic example here is one where you're just been walking through the desert for 2 days, and then you're of course completely dehydrated, as you are as a human being, as a living being would be. And then the first thing that you find in the desert oasis is a cafe, and this cafe sells coffee, and they just happen to sell absolutely nothing else. The value of that first cup of coffee when you're completely parched is extremely high, because this is not just even oh, that would be lovely to have. No, this is already life-saving levels. And then you have another cup and another cup and another cup, and maybe after your 15th cup of coffee you have actually quenched your thirst, you've replenished the all the fluids that you've lost in the desert. And then the value, if you then say, like, okay, let's just say the price of the coffee that the barista has charged you for the first one was £100, not even £5, £100, you might have actually been willing to pay £100 for that cup of coffee, just in order not to die. And then the next one, maybe you were also willing to pay another £100 for it. But then it actually gets a bit lower, and you probably don't want to pay quite as much for it anymore. And then it comes a point when you're actually unwilling to pay anything for another cup of coffee. So economists have taken this, and this was extremely important for economic theory since the 19th century in particular. So this is this Austrian school of economics as well, and for them this is all about subjective value theory. Very, very important. It doesn't seem that fundamentally important at first, but it actually is incredibly important for economic theories of value. So they've taken this, and then they turned this into a symbolization of, okay, so there's actually a curve, there's a clear graph that we can paint here. So the first cup of coffee that you're having after 2 days in the desert will be priced very, very highly, at £100. And then your willingness to pay, which is basically what's the value, the subjective value of this cup of coffee for you in this particular moment, will decrease. And economists thought that they can actually chart point by point the decreasing value of the cup of coffee in this mathematical kind of way. And that's, in my sense, a huge mistake also, because actually thirst even and the relative value of coffee doesn't even allow itself to be graphed in this particular kind of way. Also because people's metabolisms are very different. So think again of the time of day when you would be having a coffee. This is a metabolic question. It's some people's metabolism tolerate caffeine really well, some others aren't. Can it be graphed? Can it be quantified? Can it be measured? No, it cannot. It makes no sense, and people are actually very, very good also at just sensing, oh, this is not good for me to have a coffee after maybe 2 p.m. in the afternoon or so. But economists think that surely everything is going to be completely measurable, completely quantifiable, that they can render everything in terms of numbers when actually they can't. So let me just stop here for a moment. So that gives you a sense of where the economists are in terms of value theory, and also what anthropologists are actually doing more or less in the same kind of way as economists are, namely this massive attention to symbolization. So we got the mesocosm, we got the 5 mediations, we got an understanding of recursivity. And now again, back to the idea that the best value actually leaves no trace, is just there. So the best way of how water and coffee actually appears to you is when it's just actually there. It's not something that you have to worry about or have to fight for in any kind of way, and you can access it. It's just there. So think also of just how our perceptions have changed of the value of water when indoor plumbing was installed, when suddenly you had like running water in your home, and that running water, despite microplastics or other stuff, is actually very drinkable and just perfectly fine. Whereas in other times and places, you would have had to expend enormous amounts of energy and time to just get your water supply in, right? And that's even the case now. I've done a lot of research in India. There's a lot of places in India and a lot of homes in India that still actually don't even have running water in the house itself. So you always have to go outside to a pump, and then the quality of the water that comes out of this pump is often not drinkable also. So you need to put in place all sorts of other precautions to make this water potable, and so that it doesn't kill you with all sorts of diseases. Again, this is important. So we were starting to talk about the sheer importance of metabolism in relationship to value. The water, the drinkable water, is another example of this. The coffee in the desert is another example of this. And my main point here was simply, you can't symbolize your way into overcoming the metabolic constraints of life. You cannot actually replace drinking water with a symbolization of water. It doesn't work. And that's another major confusion, especially in economics, where they have this idea that surely everything is reducible to price as a form of symbolization, when actually, metabolism is just a massive constraint on the, possibilities of what you can actually do. So Again, the mesocosm then, recursivity in terms of five mediations. And the overall claim I'm making is that value is at its best when it doesn't stick out at all, when it's just there, when you don't suddenly realize that, oh my God, I am so thirsty and there is no water there. When you do not have to pay £100 for a cup of coffee after 2 days in the desert. So it's not just about appreciating it a little bit more when you've been deprived of it. This is about like real life and death stuff also. And again, the value lives in the mesocosm. And what happens then though in both in economics and in philosophy and in anthropology is this idea that if it's not been symbolized, then it doesn't really count, right? And you have the most excessive, most radical version of this in business consultancy thinking. When you think of people like not like organizations like McKinsey Business Consulting, but actually also in Edinburgh University, in pretty much every modern institution nowadays. The idea is that if it doesn't leave a symbolic trace and can't be fully quantified and made explicit, it didn't happen, right? So if there is value, but you can't put it into an Excel spreadsheet, the value isn't there. This is, to my mind, is just the most bonkers misunderstanding of value in modern times, because it's the exact opposite is the case. Like everything that's really valuable precisely never actually comes to any kind of symbolization at all. And symbolization is an absolute kind of exception, right? So philosophy, economics, and anthropology think that symbolization is the norm and that everything renders itself to symbolization, when actually it's in every case the absolute radical exception to it. And all the really good stuff usually actually lives outside and before symbolization. Often, actually, symbolization is almost like a moment of breakdown, like something that's been just fine, and suddenly you're like, oh, this isn't working really. Why is it not working? And often that's precisely where the symbolization comes in, even down to, for example, the cup of coffee after 2 days in the desert, priced at £100, is almost like one of these breakdown moments when if you actually have to pay £100 for this cup of coffee, then you would also say like, oh, there's something massively wrong here. But it's a breakdown moment already, because the water or the coffee or the fluids are not actually as available to you as you wanted them to be. It's already a mesocosmic breakdown or a severe shortage or scarcity that's there. So, and then another idea about value and how to detect it is that it often just depends on these, what I call recursivity levels. So being in the world in this mesocosm is level one. And then when you feel that something is off, a felt misalignment, or it can also be an aesthetic moment of, oh, this is beautiful, or where attention is drawn to something, then just something comes to notice, but you don't yet symbolize it, you don't have a term for it. It's just there demanding attention. That is level two felt misalignment. What I call level three is symbolization. So that's when you would actually say, I am thirsty, right? So first, you can't, being in the world is ideally when you don't have thirst at all, like you're not experiencing thirst at all. But then there's a moment, and it actually, because of metabolism, happens quite regularly, that you're like, I actually need to drink something. I need to rehydrate. And this feeling, though, the felt misalignment, in the mesocosm in an embodied kind of way itself actually doesn't even lend itself to any further symbolic elaboration at all, right? Just think of it. Thirst, when I ask you, okay, so you are thirsty. I get it. I know what it means to be thirsty. You know what it means to be thirsty. My hypothesis is that absolutely every single one of you listening to this knows exactly what thirst is and what it feels like. And now try to symbolize this further. Describe your thirst to me. Try it. You will not be able to do it. You cannot do it because there are very strong limits also on different kind of symbolic systems, what they allow you to say and what they don't allow you to say. And this is one area where you just cannot really give any further description of what that thirst is. Yeah, you can say, I'm very thirsty. Okay, that's not very specific. Can you explain this in much greater detail? No, you cannot. That's it. This is like very important to remember also just how very, very limited symbolization actually is in relationship to the mesocosm, and that a lot more things cannot actually even be symbolized that than you would think. So it's an enlightenment idea that surely everything in the world can be symbolically rendered. And part of this theory is that no, you cannot. And thirst is actually a perfect example of this. You cannot render thirst in any elaborate kind of way apart from just saying it's thirst. And yet we all know, there's different kinds of thirst. There's a thirst on a hot day when you're really sweaty. There's a thirst which comes from a very longer process of dehydration. There's a thirst related to air, to air humidity. There's all sorts of thirst. Can you describe it? No, you can't. This is very important. So this is level 3 symbolization as the third level of recursivity. And the fourth level of recursivity is when you then put this into larger classifications or categories, right? So when you would say something like uh, alimentation or beverages or all of this, but also eating and drinking would be a version of a larger classification of this. So, and what really matters is that the felt misalignment that you're sensing from your own position in the mesocosm is often, again, cannot be rendered in a clearly symbolic form fully as much as economists think it is, but they're all working on this assumption and this fictional, truly illusion of the ability to actually symbolize this fully, which again comes out in this graph that the economists are drawing of the value of the cup of coffee declining the more you've had it. This is an assumption of how a symbolization of the thirst can stand in for the actual experience, which is just taken for granted. Like, oh yeah, this is exactly the same. No, it's not exactly the same. Like this graph represents just one tiny aspect, and even that is not actually rendering in symbolic form what it means to drink a cup of coffee and then another cup of coffee, and then how your feelings about a fifth of sixth cup of coffee are declining in this way. So, and when it comes to what economists have been doing in terms of charting the world and making the world measuring value in the world, what they've done without ever actually articulating this or realizing this is that they've applied a certain kind of ontology to the world, which of course they are able to do precisely because economists are also living beings in the mesocosm. They are not rarefied beings on a different planet altogether. They're human beings just like you and me. And what they are then doing is like, okay, they of course in their intuition was to tag onto things in the mesocosm that are actually visible and can be grasped and can be measured very nicely. And that's where William Petty, for example, in the 17th century started with land surveys. You know, he wanted to measure the entire economy of the United Kingdom at the time. And where do you start measuring the value of the national economy? Well, and this was long before this was called a national economy, but uh, so where do you start? And you start with things in the mesocosm that can actually be rendered in a symbolic form in a very reliable way without distorting anything about it, right? So that's why land was so important and still is, why people are so important. So populations, also, of course, measuring money is super, super important, easy. Precisely, I mean, money as a medium is actually entirely designed to be completely quantifiable. It is quantification, and but also because it is so beautifully easy to render it. And within that, then the economists thought also, oh yeah, what can we measure in terms of what is the value of the British Isles and the realm? One thing to tag onto is also economic transactions, market transactions, because market transactions are moments of symbolic visibility, because that's a moment when the a commodity changes hands for another commodity, when one commodity is exchanged for money on the other. It's not just a very clean kind of thing to see, but it's also something that is just very easy to quantify. That's what's important. Okay, and then the economists have been building all of their models on those parts of the mesocosm that can actually be rendered in a symbolic form, and especially in a numerical, quantifiable form, for a long time. And basically, they've never articulated that this is actually what they're doing, and it seemed to work fairly well also. Actually, it seemed to work spectacularly well. That's why economics has been rising also ever since then, also as a tool of government. But what I'm arguing really in the long article or lecture script is this crucial insight that this success in quantifying parts of the mesocosm is actually very, very limited and much more contested than you think it is, or certainly that economists think. So they are just the success in counting how much land there is, or how many people there are, or how much money changed hands, was then taken as a free pass to just symbolize everything else in the mesocosm. And this is particularly clear in the case of an economist such as Gary Becker, for example, who just turned this into a general, idea that, well, if I can count money exchanges, I can also quantify love in a family, or the relationships between parents and children, right? And so much of economics that are going on are precisely these kinds of extensions of the same logic of, we can surely symbolize it and quantify it, and then we know the real value of it, where this was taken as, we can do this with everything, right? There are books which are called The Price of Everything. You can price absolutely everything. You can make everything symbolically legible in terms of price and money. And my argument is that this is an absolute illusion also, and it comes from the fact that economists have never really understood also the mesocosm itself, and that it has different kinds of affordances for actually being rendered in a symbolic form. So what happens is that love, for example, cannot be rendered in any meaningful way in a symbolic form, especially cannot be quantified in any kind of way. And yet economists proceed it as if it can. That is just a matter of operationalizing this better, or fine tuning your criteria for this, or your measurements on this. But no, it's absolutely impossible, and there's many reasons why love cannot be priced in this way. Not just that it just is part of a mesocosmic coordination with others that is actively destroyed by this kind of approach, but also because love, and you will see this with so many other areas where there's something actually deeply recursive happening. Love is deeply recursive. It's entirely about one being and another being and lots of other beings, and it changes all the time, and it matters. Just it's not just your own private feeling, it's something that actually is an entire relationship. It's so deeply recursive also, and everything that's actually recursive is not just complex. This is so it's actually what happens to everything that is really recursive, is that it's beyond meaningful prediction in terms of quantifications or metrics or scales in any kind of way. So that, there are of course forms of symbolizing love, but you can't really meaningfully quantify love if you're using numbers as your symbolic system. But economists somehow don't know that there are these ontological barriers to what can be meaningfully, carved up in the mesocosm in this way. And this is, and I'm going to end on that note, there's more in the script, but this is very important also for understanding most of the recent discussions around value and alternative metrics for value. So you have authors like David Graeber, but also Mazzucato, and a number of other people who've been trying to say, like, there's so much that's valuable in the world, but it defies quantification. It defies price. It doesn't seem to be beyond anything that's transactional or based on any kind of exchanges. And this is absolutely true also, that this is impossible. But their solution has been to say, okay, we just need to find new symbolic forms of rendering love, for example, as valuable. And it's just a matter of tinkering with our symbolic capacities in order to bring out this kind of value. And my argument is that this is a good impulse. I understand this also, but it actually fails precisely on this ontological level, that you can't actually put a price on so many aspects of the mesocosm, especially not pricing it without actually actively destroying it. So this was a puzzle actually that I was talking about. So David Graeber died, unfortunately, a few years ago, and it was actually something I was still discussing with him over emails just before his death, because and we could never come to a conclusion on this. But my point at the time to him, and this is now so much clearer to me as well, the main point, so he was really struck also by this question of why is it the case that so much care work, like nursing, for example, or people who work in old age homes. Why are they so paid so little money, and work that's done by some hedge fund bros, basically, that doesn't seem to add any real value to the world, gets rewarded financially so highly. And he was, of course, struggling with this greatly, because as a Marxist and anarchist, he absolutely detested that. But yeah, his idea was also that we need to find new forms of symbolization of value in order to account this, and then to redistribute rewards accordingly. So that we need to find a new symbolization of the value of the work that care workers actually do, in order then to reward them financially properly for it. And again, the impulse is completely correct, but my argument is that you need to still be aware that almost most of what really matters in care work, for example, is precisely also of such a kind, in ontologically, mesocosmically, that is actually beyond metrification, beyond quantification. So think of what makes a really good nurse is often just all of the things that cannot be rendered in a clearly legible symbolic form at all. And then to force also nurses into a position where they, okay, you've done a nice, you smiled at a patient, you said a word of encouragement, you have responded warmly to one of their relatives. If you actually then force the nurses to fully symbolize what they've done in terms of value added of their job, this is the best way of actually completely destroying what makes this valuable, right? It is simply, what you need is an understanding that there are vast domains of the mesocosm that cannot be rendered symbolically legible in any meaningful way without actually destroying it. And again, that is, to my mind, the biggest misunderstanding of the modern era, is to think that surely everything that's valuable will render itself in a symbolic form anyway, and that's a good thing, and because then we can properly calculate it, and also reward true value. But my point is, there are so many domains of the mesocosm that simply don't allow it. And we just need to think about value creation in a completely different way than that. So I'm gonna end at that. I'm gonna post this long attempt to explain the basics of the theory and the new value theory. But I'm also gonna post a transcript of what I've been talking about today, so you don't even have to listen to me until the end of this. Okay.